if you miss any of the discussions, you may find it on YouTube. Also, there will be a question and answer session at the end of the discussion. If you have any questions, please use the raise hand feature also in order to maintain the queue. If you are not speaking, please mute yourself in order to minimize the disturbances. Thank you.
Recording in progress.
Thank you, Prajwal, and welcome to everyone. So this is the second session in this series of classes and discussions on the foundational text of Indian philosophy. So if you remember, in the last session, I mentioned a few things about the gradation of the philosophical and spiritual canonical literature of Hinduism. I mean, the canonical literature, the entire Hindu canon can be divided into three fundamental categories. One, at the highest level, we have what is called Vedanta, Upanishads, or in the more traditional circles, it is called Shruti. In fact, one definition of Shruti itself is Shruyate Brahmadinam Paramatmanam Labhante iti Veda. So Shankaracharya in his Bhashya Sanasujadiya Bhashya, he says, a source of spiritual canonical literature from which we learn about the fundamental spiritual principles of life and existence, which are common to all people, all times, all ages, irrespective of the change in terms of times, geography, culture, and so on. Some of the fundamental spiritual questions and subjects and topics are discussed. And finally, the conclusion is reached in the Advaita, the non-dualistic system of Vedanta, which teaches that there is one divine spark present in all of us. It is called Sarva Antaryami, the indweller. And it is all-pervading. It is omnipresent. It is Sarva Vyapi. And then it is transcendental. It is Sarvatida. This is the highest conclusions of Indian philosophy. So I already mentioned this. Now, at the second level, there is a group of books, group of canonical literature called Smritis. And Smritis are more or less like the constitutions, books containing instructions and do's and don'ts, which are relevant only for those times, which may be or may not be relevant to our times. For example, let us think of a book of constitution that is relevant, let us say, around 2000 BC, 4000 years ago. Now, many of those ideas may have some relevance to our times, but many may not have any value or relevance. They are called Smritis. And I want to tell you something very important in this context. Many of the problems of Hindu society that you hear and read about, like casteism, divisiveness at the social level. A large number of people were kept out of the periphery of religious and spiritual practices. They were not even allowed to study the Vedas. And there was a lot of inequality and social injustices, which don't exist today. Indian constitution that came into existence after India became independent in 1947, Indian constitution has completely made it illegal to practice many of these teachings which are found in the Smritis. For your information, as a matter of historical interest, some of you may be interested to know, for the first time, Many of these ancient law books were translated into English, and they became the foundation of Hindu code, Hindu law, and this was done under the British rule. In 18th century, even Sir Warren Hastings became the first Governor General of Bengal. He invited a large number of Pandits from different places, and they actually translated many of these Smrtis called Vyasa Smrti, Parasara Smrti, Jabala Smrti, Apastamba Smrti. These are all different names of different sages. Jabala, Apastamba, Parashara. And so these are all different sages who wrote these books, maybe 3000 BC or maybe even earlier. So he translated many of these into, and they formed the Hindu code. So Hindu property succession law, it's called Dayakrama, which is actually Yajnavalkya Smriti and this commentary on Yajnavalkya Smriti called Mitakshara. They all formed some of the principles of Hindu law, which were sometimes incorporated into modern Indian constitution after India became independent. But remember, none of these Smritis have any absolute authority in the life of Hindu people, Hindu population, or in the philosophical structure of Hinduism. Many of them may have some value, many of them do not have any value. They are called Smritis, second in authority. The third and the last place goes to Puranas. If you read the Puranas, it's more like reading Homer and Iliad. If we read the Iliad and Odyssey, and if you read the works of Homer, you find gods and goddesses coming down to earth, participating in the war between the Greeks and Trojans. And some of them help different groups. More like that. Nobody takes them seriously. So also you find Hindu Puranas. They contain a lot of stories, kings and dynasties, sages and saints, living for thousands of years, people with, sometimes with Kartavirya Arjuna. Ravana had only 10 heads, but there were other wonderful characters in Hindu Purana which had many more heads and hands and feet and so on. Nobody takes them seriously. Now the problem is, many of these books also contain ideas which are very, very divisive, which form the foundations of the practice of inequality, social injustices. A large number of people were kept out of the social structure. They were not allowed to participate in any of the religious rituals. So there was a lot of social injustices in those times, which actually became the foundation of this social custom, called casteism. Casteism originally was a kind of a division of labor based on human temperaments, attitudes and behavior patterns. The same family you can have Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya and Shudra. But later when you come to Puranas, all these became very rigid. They became a very rigid system based on birth. So, but remember, these Puranas have got only the third place in this gradation of Hindu canon. Now, sometimes you find many people who actually don't know. They will tell you Hinduism means people, it's stories about kings who lived for thousands of years, who did things which are totally irrational. But the point is, the authors of these Puranas and Smritis themselves clearly stated, don't take us seriously if we contradict the teachings of the Vedas, the teachings of the Srutis. For the first time, this idea was brought before the attention of educated people for the first time in modern times by Swami Vivekananda. In 19th century, Swami Vivekananda emerged, and he was a man who was steeped in Hindu philosophical, spiritual literature, and also he was a man with an excellent modern education. He again and again reminded modern interpreters of Hinduism and also the common people that you should remember the most foundational, the most fundamental authority in philosophical and spiritual and even cultural matters are the Shrutis, means, and Shruti again, not the entire Vedas. Samhitas, Brahmanas, Aranyakas, they don't have the status of permanent value. Vedanta, Upanishads, because if Upanishads are impersonal, it's called Apaurusheya. Upanishads actually talk about the fundamental human urge for spiritual discovery, spiritual self-discovery. And this fundamental spiritual urge can be found among people in all countries at all times. For your information, for the first time, I'm talking in the context of modern Western world, for the first time, when a man like Schopenhauer and then Max Muller, Paul Deussen, and in 20th century, he was not an Indologist, but a journalist, Paul Brunton, an American living in New York. When they came in contact with this Upanishadic literature, these higher ideas enshrined in the Vedantic literature, it's called Shruti, S-H-R-U-T-I, it's without diacritical marks, of course. When they discovered these great spiritual, universal spiritual truths of the Vedantic literature, they were struck, and they found that these constitute essentially the fundamental, the universal human aspiration for higher life. I am now going to give you 3 fundamental quotations from 3 different Smriti literature, Smriti texts, which tell you, don't take us seriously if we contradict the teachings of the Upanishads. Now, the first one is, it is from Apastamba Smriti. Apastamba is a great lawgiver. He says, Yadadrishtam hi vedeshu tadrishtavyam smrtau kila upabhyam yadadrishtam hi tat puraneshu patthite sudhi smriti puraneshu viruddheshu parasparam purvam biliyasyat idi nyaya vido vidu. Because this is being recorded, so it will be useful for those who are students of Indian philosophy. Because the problem of studying Indian philosophy is, people don't study these passwords. These are passwords. If you don't know the password, you cannot open your computer. So people grab some book from somewhere and then they think Hinduism is absolute. Hinduism is all about stories of gods with different faces and different colors and different, so many hands and legs and feet and heads and so on. That is not so. So this particular text tells you, wherever you find certain things which are not mentioned in the fundamental essential book in the Vedas, that is Upanishads, you may get it in the Smritis, and sometimes if they are not found in the Shrutis, Vedanta, or Smritis, the law books, you may find the Puranas. But remember, if there is a contradiction between the teachings, injunctions of Vedanta or Shruti and the law books, Smritis or Puranas, then you should accept the teachings of the Vedantic books, Upanishads, Shrutis, as authentic. You should discard the teachings of Smritis and Puranas. So rational. The problem with many religious traditions is, they take every comma, every word, every letter as coming from God. And many of those ideas must have been formed during the tribal times, thousands of years ago, centuries ago. They may have had a relevance for those times when society was slowly evolving from tribal to agrarian, then industrial and so on, urban and so on. During this transition from different stages of social evolution, man advances, human civilization also advances. Many of the old values become become irrelevant. But if you take every word as coming from God, there will be a lot of problems. You try to impose today what some books which are written maybe 3,000 years ago. If you interpret them literally in this 21st century, there will be a lot of problems. But Hinduism does not do that. Hinduism says, you take the fundamental, universal, spiritual teachings, humanistic teachings, which are relevant for all times. And Abhastamba, in his own book, he says, Abhastamba Smriti, he says, my book, my law book, may contain many things, perhaps, which contradict the fundamental universal teachings of the Vedas. Then you throw me out and you accept what Vedanta teaches. That is the beauty, the charm, the grandeur, the relevance of this text. Second text is from another sage, Jabala. His name is mentioned in the Upanishad literature, the Chandogya Upanishad, you can find Jabala. Jabala Smriti is a Smriti written by this sage, maybe 4000 BC. That is 6,000 years ago. And there he says, Sruti Smriti Virodeshu Shrutireva Gariyasi Avirodhe tu Sada Karyam Smartam Vaidikavat Sada. This is a contradiction between the ideas mentioned in the law books, which are relevant only for those ancient times, and the books which talk about universal, eternal, spiritual ideas. Then don't take what I say seriously. You listen to the great teachings of the Upanishadic sages, the Shrutis, Vedanta, Jabala Smriti. So they themselves tell you, please kindly don't take me seriously if I say something that is in contradiction to what the Vedanta tells you. So that means you can take any book, and many of the ideas that you find in the ancient books may have had a relevance in those times when, as I mentioned, society was in transition from the early stages of tribalism to agrarian life, to industrial life, and also in more, urban life. For example, today, 21st century, this is an IT age. Whether you accept it or whether you like it or not, the world has become one. So today, whatever you teach should have a relevance for all people in this world, not only for all people, for all creatures. You cannot even neglect the purity, the preservation of nature, air and water. You cannot even concentrate on the interest that are concerned with human life alone. You have to extend your thoughts even beyond the human society. The third text is also very important. I am just quoting from different authors. It is Sruti Smriti Purananam Virodho Yatra Drishyate Tatra Saudam Pramanasya Tayodaiti Subhidirvara. And so what it says is, this is the most important, and this comes from Vyasa. You know who was Vyasa? Vyasa is the one, the great sage, who wrote all the Puranas. And he also wrote Vyasa's Smriti. Smriti, again we should remember Smriti, S-M-R-I-T-I. Roughly, it corresponds to modern constitutions, books that contain teachings of do's and don'ts for individual life, family life, social life. You can find in Manusmriti Nribadharma, the normal form of conduct for a human being. Rajadharma, Nriba means king, Rajadharma, then Naradharma for ordinary human beings, Naradharma for kings, Rajadharma or Nribadharma, Grihastha Dharma for householders, and again Yadidharma for monks. So there are different rules, do's and don'ts meant for people from different professions, different classes of life. They have their own duties, do's and don'ts. If you are interested, if you read Buddha's Jataka tales, Jataka tales, Buddha's rebirth stories. You can find many stories related to people from different walks of life. So you can imagine the concept of different do's and don'ts, codes of conduct which are prevalent in different social circles. So Vyasa is the great author who wrote 36 huge books, 18 Mahapuranas, 18 Upapuranas, 18 fundamental mythological books, Mahapuranas, and then subsidiary mythological books, Upapuranas. 36. You need one full shelf to arrange all these books. And he's the one who actually classified Vedas into Samhita, Aranyaka, Brahmana, Upanishad, and so on. And he also wrote a book of law, Vyasa Smriti. In that Smriti he says, Sudhi Smriti Purananam Virodho Etra Drishyade Tatra Sraudam Pramanam Sya Tayadvaidi Smriti Dvara. He says, Sudhi, Smriti and Puranas. If there is a contradiction between Srutis and Smritis, Srutis are important, authentic. If there is a contradiction between Smritis and Puranas, then Smritis are important, Puranas should be discarded. This is a statement that comes from the author of this Smriti called Vyasa Smriti. Now one question arises. What are these universal fundamental teachings? As I mentioned, Srutis. If you read the Upanishads, Brihadaranyaka, Chandogya and so on, you find there are many stories, there are many anecdotes, there are many parables. All of them should not be taken as fundamental. They do have a place and importance, but there are certain teachings which actually give you a picture of our journey in spiritual space. Of course, there are long passages in the Chandogya, in the Brihadaranyaka, in the Isha, Kena, Katha, Prasna, Mundaka, Mandukya, Taittiriya, Aitareya, and so on, which are all commented by Shankaracharya. They contain some stories. The stories perhaps do not have any eternal value, but there are some fundamental teachings in all these which are of eternal relevance. That's why when Schopenhauer read it, he thought this is the story of human aspirations in spiritual life. When Max Muller started reading it, he never looked back. 40 years he dedicated his entire life to study and write about these books. Paul Deussen and so on. Not just one, many. Because when you read these Upanishads, you find, oh, this is my own story. This is my own story. Many of these teachings were interpreted by commentators. So in Indian philosophical tradition, I already mentioned this earlier, there is a close connection between spirituality, religion on the one hand and philosophy on the other. You cannot really separate one from the other in Indian context. See, in Western philosophical context, for example, J.S. Mill, his faith has absolutely nothing to do with what he taught. Kant, Immanuel Kant, whatever religion he practiced, maybe he did not practice any religion. Whether he went to the church regularly or not, it has nothing at all to do with what he wrote. Absolutely no connection, absolutely no justification to connect one with the other. But in Indian context, if Ramanuja writes a bhashya, it's a commentary on Gita, then you look for his life and you find that he was actually writing poetry in praise of the God whom he depicted in his philosophical books. So theology, spirituality and philosophy, they're all intertwined. So in the four Vedas, there are four great statements. They constitute the essence of India's Vedantic or spiritual philosophical tradition. Four fundamental statements. They are called Mahavakya. These Mahavakyas actually will show us the natural human aspiration and our journey in search of our own spiritual self-discovery. They are four in number. One is in the Shukla Yajurveda, in the Brihadaranya Upanishad, you have got this Aham Brahmasmi. In the Samaveda, in the Chandogya Upanishad, you have got Tattwamasi. These are two important Mahavakyas. There are two more. Of these, the later one, Tattwamasi, it is an instruction. What does it say? The truth to God, the divine spark that you are searching for. It is within you. It is you yourself, but not this body, not this mind. If you think of, if you can contemplate on what is my true nature, what am I beyond my body, beyond my mind, beyond my intellect, that divine spirit, that all-pervading spirit, that Atman, this is you yourself. This is an instruction that comes from a teacher called Uddalaka, given to his own son and disciple, Swetaketu. It is spread over the entire 6th chapter of Chandogya Upanishad, which is from the Samaveda tradition, which is the 6th chapter has got 16 sections, khandas, of which from 9 to 16, this is discussed in each section of that text. You are that spiritual truth. It means you can go to temple or church, okay, but eventually you will find your God is within you. There is a divine spirit within you. You manifest that inner divinity. This is being discussed. And this is the most vital, the most crucial, the most fundamental instruction in the entire Vedic literature. Anyone who is reading this, whether you believe in God or not, even if you are a civilized, a refined human being, you will immediately connect with that, because I should really find out my own true nature. This is called the instruction of the instruction given to a disciple, a statement of instruction. It is called Upadesha Vakya in Sanskrit, means a statement of instruction. Now, the later one which I mentioned is Aham Brahmasmi. That corresponds to a person's real inner experience, self-discovery. As a result of long practices of meditation, contemplation and so on, he realizes that I am that divine spirit. During this interval between instruction and experience, there are different stages of evolution. That is called Lakshana Vakya, is the Prajnanam Brahma, and Ayamatma Brahma. It comes from the Atharva Veda, in Mandukya Upanishad. It is called Anusandhana Vakya. So you contemplate on certain fundamental teachings, and you start on your spiritual journey. As a result of this, you get this Aham Brahmasmi experience. Now, just giving one example. Now we will come back to the area of canonical literature. Now, in Vedantic tradition, one important thing I mentioned last time, there are different schools of Vedanta. And after giving an outline of the 12 systems of Indian philosophy, broadly speaking, broad divisions, that is 6 Āstika or orthodox systems of philosophy, and 6 Nastika or the non-orthodox or heterodox systems of Indian philosophy. In Āstika tradition, in orthodox tradition, there is Purva Mimamsa of Jaimini, Uttara Mimamsa of Badarayana, then Sankhya Yoga, Sankhya of Kapila, Yoga of Patanjali, then Nyaya and Vaisheshika, Nyaya of Gautama and Vaisheshika philosophy of Kannada, 6 systems. And then among the non-orthodox or heterodox or Nastika system of philosophy. We have Jainism, then Indian materialism, which is Charvaka system, and then we have the 4 schools of Buddhism, Sautrantika and Vaibhashika, which are realistic schools belonging to the Hinayana tradition, and Yogacara and Shunyavada belonging to the Mahayana system, which is called idealistic schools of philosophy. These are 12 systems of philosophy. In addition to all this, there are many fringe groups, innumerable schools of Indian philosophy, some philosophical systems based on word, letter, Spodavada, which I will discuss later on. Now, coming back to Vedanta, which is our first and the initial subject of discussion, Vedanta. In the Vedantic tradition, there are altogether more than 7 distinct schools of Vedanta. The most prominent and the most important and most well-known, maybe the only well-known Vedantic schools in the Western world is the school of Advaita or non-dualism, Shankaracharya. He was born in the 8th century, and according to his system, the absolute reality is one divine spark, which is beyond names and forms and attributes, not devoid of names and forms, but beyond, not limited by names and forms, but transcending everything. Cannot be called by a specific name, doesn't mean it doesn't have a name, it means beyond definitions, beyond descriptions. It is a matter of our own inner experience. Truth is one, and the absolute reality is that all-pervading reality. And essentially, our true nature and absolute reality are the same. It doesn't mean, again, there's a lot of misunderstandings in this. Those of you who are interested, I have given a number of lectures in the New Temple, the evolution of Advaita. You can listen to them. There are many misunderstandings. That Shankara taught you that we are all gods. No. What Shankara taught was, within you, there is something that is beyond the body, mind and intellect. That divine spark. That is one. That is all-pervading. That is present in everyone, everything. So, that is the essence of Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya Jivo Brahmaiva Nabara. These teachings of Advaita or non-dualistic system of philosophy, which is most prominent and most popular system of Vedanta. The second one is Visishta Advaita, qualified non-dualism. According to Ramanuja Acharya, God has got innumerable attributes, qualities, names, and so on. It is a devotional system of philosophy. The third one is dualism. Madhva Acharya, he belonged to 13th century, sometimes a little earlier, and he believed that there is a fundamental difference between God and us, between the world and us, and among the different spiritual seekers there is a fundamental difference. I mean, difference among things in the world, different fundamental, unbreakable, unbreachable difference between different spiritual seekers, different creatures in the world, and in other words called Panchabheda Siddhanta. Everything is different from everything else. This is his teaching. Of course, then we have Nimbarka, who lived in the 12th and 13th century. He also is called Dvaita Advaita. And then we have Vallabha Acharya, Shuddha Advaita. He belonged to 15th or 16th century. 16th century we have got Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And in the 19th century we have got, of course, a group called Swaminarayan sect, which is actually a kind of devotional system of philosophy, which is perhaps more or less based on temple ritual worship and so on. So this is the picture of Vedantic tradition. Now, again, one important thing to remember. In Sanskrit, there are certain technical names by which these philosophers' fundamental views are named or defined. For example, according to Advaita, Advaitinam Brahma Nimitta Upadana Karana. Means Advaitins believe, non-dualistic philosophers believe that Brahman, the absolute reality, is the material cause and also the efficient cause of this world. I mean, the world itself is nothing but an appearance. Appearance doesn't mean that it is absolutely non-existent. It means when you realize your own true nature, then you realize the fundamental unity and oneness of existence. Then you don't differentiate things in terms of names and forms. Then you realize the fundamental unity and oneness of existence. Then the ancient philosophers, Sankhyas, who follow the path of Kapila and Ishvara Krishna, they believed in a kind of evolution. There's Indian school of evolution, it's called Parinamavada. They believed in two fundamental categories. That is Purusha, which is self-effulgent, and Prakriti, which is non-effulgent. And everything in this world is an evolute of that Prakriti. It's called Pradhana. It's called Pradhana Parinamavada. That we'll discuss in course of time. Then, of course, there are other schools, Vaisheshikas and Naiyayikas. Vaisheshikas, you may call them Indian. It's called Indian atomism. The school was founded by a great sage called Kanada. He believed that everything that exists in the world is independent. To give an example, a piece of cloth which is actually coming from threads, or let us say a mud pot which is coming from mud. According to this school, Vaisheshika school, Kannada school, they will tell you this mud pot has a distinct name and a distinct form. Therefore, it is essentially different and distinct from the mud from which it is made. And they believe that because the mud pot is used for a purpose other than the purpose of mud. Or give another example, let us say a necklace, a ring made from gold, let us say. They will tell you when the gold becomes a golden ring, it gets a new shape and it gets a new name. So Nama and Rupa. Nama means name, Rupa means shape or form. And therefore we use it for a different purpose. We don't use gold for wearing in your as an ornament. You don't do that. So it is a new existence, a new creation, it's a new product, new effect, they will say. It's called Arambhavada, means the doctrine that tells you that anything that comes from a cause is essentially different from the cause. Effect and cause are two different things. Every effect signifies the emergence of a new entity. To understand this, it's opposite what we can say. There, for example, the Sankhyas, and of course Vedantis also will tell you. They will tell you that the effect pre-exists in cause. For example, the golden ring pre-exists in gold. A clay cup, a cup made of clay, pre-exists in the clay. Why? Because you remove all the clay from a clay pot, you won't find any pot in there. You remove all the gold from a golden ring, there is no more golden ring available. So they will tell you that the effect pre-exists in cause. It's called, it is the opposite of Parinamavada. It is the opposite of it. It's called Satkaryavada, which means the effect already pre-existing in cause. Vaisheshikas and Naiyayikas will tell you, no, the effect is something new. Then there are, of course, different schools of Buddhism, but there is a fundamental theory that unifies them all. They believe in Kshanabhangavada, everything is momentary, momentariness. And they interpret momentariness in different terms, according to Sautrantikas and Vaibhashikas, Vijnanavadins, Sunyavadins, which we discuss in course of time. Then you may have heard of a school called Jainas. You know, most of you may be at least familiar with vegan food. The vegan food is actually, we should thank the Jainas for, that's what I'm told. I'm given to understand that this vegan food originates from Jaina tradition, because they don't eat anything. They're cutthroat, absolute vegetarians, more like me, though I'm not a Jaina. So the point is, they believe in Syagvada. It's a school of philosophy which is well known for its indecisive nature. I mean, they accept different options. Then, of course, there are other schools, Pashupathamada. I mean, there are those who believe in the doctrine that the Pashupati, different interpretation of Shiva, is the fundamental reality. Everything is actually caused by a creator God, more like modern monotheistic theories. Now, I'm just giving an outline. This is just an outline. Now, coming to the real subject. I already mentioned earlier that the most fundamental canon or canonical literature in Indian philosophy, Indian spirituality, Indian culture, even in the area of performing rituals, for example, elaborate rituals, the most fundamental authority are the Vedas. These Vedas themselves have got different forms. You may ask this question. It's a very ancient civilization, ancient country, densely populated country, which is very ancient, which used to be very fertile, so many rivers, so many groups and so many cultural traditions. So how could they maintain all of this? And I should mention now at this stage the very one important thing. In Indian tradition, you find every age produces a new interpreter, a new exponent of the fundamental truths of Vedas, Vedic teachings. To give an example, you can read Swami Vivekananda's well-known lecture. You can find it in the category of Colombo to Almora lectures. A lecture that Swami Vivekananda gave in South India, addressing an audience, called Sages of India. It's a very fairly long lecture. When Swamiji returned from the West, even he returned to India, he travelled all the way from Colombo to Almora. So it's called Colombo to Almora lectures. It may be the part of the third volume of Swami Vivekananda's complete works. It's called Sages of India. In this lecture, Swami Vivekananda makes some very important observations which are of great interest, should be of great interest to all students of Indian philosophy. Swamiji says that Swami Vivekananda actually gives a list of great teachers who emerged in India from time to time. All the way from ancient times, Rama and Krishna, then Buddha, then Shankaracharya, then Ramanuja, and Madhva, and then Chaitanya, and coming to our own times. His own teacher, the great teacher of 19th century, Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, and so on. So Vivekananda says, these great teachers they're called acharyas, some of them called avatars. You may call them incarnations, or you may call them great teachers. What they did not give you something new. Rather, what they did was, they took the best from the ancient Vedic literature, then they reinterpreted those teachings to make them suitable to their own times and passed over to the next generation. For example, if you read Vivekananda's complete works, what you find is nothing but a new modern interpretation of certain eternal truths in a language and vocabulary that is suitable, intelligible to his times, people who are living in the later half of 19th century. when he traveled to India, so traveled all over India and then to Europe and also the United States. So he found a new world. A world was totally different from the world that Shankaracharya saw in the 8th century. A world totally different from the world that Buddha encountered in the 6th century BC. But what he did was, even Lord Krishna, in the Bhagavad Gita, he actually expounds the same great truths, 3rd millennium BC. Now, but the world had become different. The world had changed. Human civilization had changed. Values have changed. So what Vivekananda did, according to him and his own words, he says, I preach nothing but the Upanishads. That's it. After traveling all over the world, after founding this great organization like Ramakrishna Mission, after expounding Vedanta in modern times, what he did, I preached nothing but the Upanishads. There's something very, very important for us to remember. So that's what every great Indian teacher does. He takes the best from ancient Upanishadic tradition, the eternal spiritual truths, the eternal spiritual philosophical truths, which are relevant for all times, and then he analyzes, he practices in his life, and he reinterprets without changing even a little bit of the ancient fundamental principles, but changing the language, the method of interpretation, the examples and parables, using the language of his own times. That's what every great teacher did and does in India. See, if you look at Vivekananda, he is at one end of the spectrum. At the other end, you can Buddha, 6th century BC. Between these two, Shankaracharya, 8th century AD. All the great teachers, what Buddha did, according to Vivekananda, was Buddha took up these great eternal truths of the Upanishads and gave them a humanistic, you may call it a more pragmatic interpretation, because that was the need of the hour, of his times. The same thing Shankaracharya did, the same thing all the great philosophers did. And that is called Acharya Parampara or Avataras. Means Acharya Parampara means succession, an unbroken lineage of succession of great teachers who preserve, who sustains, who protects these eternal truths by putting the old wine in new bottle, new label, but the same great truths are preached. So what we are reading today in Vivekananda's words, he refers to Kant, Hegel, Spinoza, and so on, all modern. He even refers to socialism, you find in Vivekananda's lectures, you find. But he's actually talking about the great eternal truths about which Shankaracharya spoke, which Shankaracharya expounded, which Buddha expounded, which Lord Krishna in 3rd millennium BC expounded in the Bhagavad Gita. So, those who are interested to know this lineage of succession, you can read the Sages of India, Vivekananda's famous lecture in the complete books. So, now coming to the subject. Now, first of all, we should know there are 4 Vedas. Each of these Vedas, I got Samhita, Brahmana, Aranyaka and Upanishad. The great statements that I referred to, for example, Tattwamasi is from Samaveda, Aham Brahmasmi is from Yajurveda, and Ayamatma Brahma is from Atharvaveda, is the Mandukya Upanishad, and Prajnanam Brahma is from Aitareya, it is from Rigveda. So, each of these 4 Vedas has 4 divisions: Brahmana, Samhita, Brahmana, Aranyaka and Upanishad. And again, each of these Vedas have got Vedangas, certain auxiliary branches of learning. called phonetics, grammar, prosody, etymology, astronomy, and the science of rituals. It's called Siksha, Vyagaranam, Chandas, Niruktam, Jyotisham, and Kalpa. These are things that should be studied. Now, one may ask this question, where is the time to spend a whole lifetime to study all this? You study the Upanishads. That's enough. Actually, you don't have to go through, unless you feel an inner call to dedicate your whole life to study this. One cannot even think of even reading any of this. So 4 Vedas, each of the Vedas got 4 divisions. That is Samhita, Brahmana, Aranyaka, and Upanishad. And then 6 Vedangas. That is Shiksha, Vyagaranam, Chandasa, Niruktam, Jyotisham, and Kalpa. That means phonetics. Phonetics is very important, those of you are interested. Phonetics was a highly developed science of in ancient times. Naradiya Siksha, Paniniya Siksha, even the art of pronunciation, even the art of using words and sentences in a refined manner, in a manner that gives you a kind of inner fulfillment and that gives others a sense of inner fulfillment when they listen to you. One interesting expression is there, I think most probably is in Paniniya Siksha. He says, a proper word used with propriety is the greatest contribution, greatest heritage you can think of for yourself. Maybe it's a bit too much, but then the purity, the art of refinement of language. So phonetics, you have to remember, Daniel Jones wrote the pronunciation of English. Of course, fortunately in America it's not so very popular. Daniel Jones and Jimson, together they developed what they call a kind of civilized pronunciation called RP. That's only in the early decades of 20th century, which Americans fortunately don't care much for, of course. And in modern times, maybe Chomsky and many other linguists may have given some thoughts to refinement language. So Paniniya Siksha, Naradiya Siksha, all these great works on Sanskrit phonetics belong to 3rd millennium BC. Remember. So that is fun. Then grammar. Grammar, that's also Panini is also the author of the fundamental book Rashtadhyayi with 8 chapters, the discovery of which was a turning point in the history of modern philology and modern linguistics in the Western world. The Western world's encounter with Ashtadhyayi, Sanskrit grammatical work, was a turning point. It brought a revolution in the entire field of philology and linguistics. Then Chandas, that is prosody, different meters. And then of course etymology. It's actually partly linked to grammar. It's called Niruktam. Yaska was the great sage who wrote the book Niruktam, etymology of different words. For example, one word, God, G-O-D, not G, capital G, but G-O-D, small, gods and goddesses. More like angels. Let's say parallel in Christian tradition. So it's called Deva. So Devo, Danadva, Diepanadva, Dyodanadva, Paundidi. So the word Deva can mean somebody who listens to your prayers and gives you what you are asking for. Dusthanova, this is one there, mean who is staying in the heavenly regions, celestial beings. Like that, each word, not all the words in the Veda, very small collection of Vedic mantras are taken by Yaska, and he wrote a well-known book called Etymology. It's called Yaska's Nirukta. Then there is astrology. It's called astronomy and astrology. Both are interrelated. Vedic astrology and astronomy are closely related. And then we have Kalpas, a whole book dedicated to the science of performing different rituals, their details, their methods, and so on. And then we have also this philosophy of rituals called Purvamimamsa, higher philosophy, Upanishadic philosophy, Uttaramimamsa, that we talk Vedanta. Then in addition to that, we have these itihasas, more they are a bit history and also a lot of mythology, Ramayana, Mahabharata. And of course, then we have 18 fundamental mythological books called Mahapuranas, 18 Upapuranas, secondary mythological books. So the point is, what it says is the huge branch of literature. Somebody may ask this question: what is the relevance of all these to our times? Well, in one respect, the question is very logical. One should be, in modern times, one should be very careful about spending time and energy. The point is, when you take up a philosophical system, when you take a religious faith system, whatever it is, you can use your own independent thought, your own powers of independent reasoning, perfectly okay. But it is also important to understand that system of philosophy from the perspective of the culture where it originated. So, for example, when I try to understand, say, Christian theology, when I try to read Augustine Aquinas, actually only in English translation, what I should do, if I am a sensible person, I should try to understand, and then I should also try to respect the traditional hierarchical interpretation of Augustine and Aquinas from their own perspectives, from their own traditional ecclesiastical, hierarchical, Catholic perspective. I should not ignore it. I cannot just read one book and say this is the real meaning without actually understanding the language or the tradition or the culture background of the book where it was written. This is on the one hand, it is minimum decency. On the other hand, it is an intellectual integrity and honesty. So it is very important for us to understand this lineage, this tradition, this what we call parampara, the succession of great teachers. So that is true of Buddhism, Christianity, Judaism, all these great faith systems which have got their own huge philosophical literature. Because this heritage is the treasure of human civilization. This is an important thing to remember. If you disinherit yours, if you disown your own heritage, if you have got, let us say, $1 billion in the bank, and due to some delusions, you start thinking, I'm a pauper, and you start living in the middle of a street asking, anything will do, you end up being you end up begging in the streets, forgetting the fact that you have $1 billion in the bank. That is a kind of cultural suicide. So also, these great treasure houses of Hinduism, which are now mostly enshrined in the innumerable libraries, manuscript libraries, which is very important for us to remind ourselves of these vast treasure houses which constitute the priceless heritage, civilizational, intellectual, spiritual and philosophical heritage of humanity, as Western Indologists began to discover right from the middle of 18th century onwards. So thank you. Now we can have interaction. You are most welcome with questions. Thank you. Yeah.
I had two questions.
Yeah, most welcome.
You mentioned that the Vedas were organized into the Samhita, Brahmana, Aranyaka, and Upanishad. I have seen a citation, for instance, Aitareya Upanishad is in the Rig Veda, Dvitiya Aitareya Aranyaka.
Yeah. I must say a few things in this connection. It is believed that Vedas were just one, and that is the view of traditional scholars. These Vedas were divided into 4 distinct schools, like Rig Veda, Yajurveda, Samaveda, and Atharva Veda by Vyasa. Actually, it is wrong to say classically. Vyasa dhatu means, root means editing. So most probably he must have classified them into 4 branches, and each tradition came to be known as Rigveda Parambara, the traditional Rigveda, Yajurveda, Samaveda, and Atharvaveda, which again got subdivided in course of time. So when you talk about history, it's very difficult. That's a problem with Indian society or Hindu society in general. They were not very much history oriented, So you don't find the exact. Historians have different views. There are historians who tell you that Rigveda just belongs to, it's just about 2000 BC, but it's very difficult to believe because the Rigveda Samhita, for example, there are mantras which talk about river Saraswati as a living river. Vyasa is said to have been, Vyasa, he was sitting on the banks of river Saraswati. The Saraswati was a living river, perhaps 15,000 years ago, 13,000 BC. That's because according to modern geologists, the river disappeared. Of course, it is something that anyone can find out from its source, different geological sources. So, very difficult to pinpoint the exact line of demarcation in terms of history. But what we can do, we have to, please wait, we have to find some kind of a compromise between extreme ultra-modern historians who want to push everything forward to make Egyptian history look older. There's a trend, unfortunately, which happened after the French Egyptologists that discovered Egyptian civilization. There was deliberate attempt to push Egyptian civilization forward, but later historians reacted. Now that trend is gone. So it's best to say that the Vedas, as we find today, are at least 4,000, 5,000 BC. That's roughly you can say. This exact historical record is not known.
When somebody announces his lineage,
actually, please tell me. Yeah.
He says he has certain Rishi Pravara, Gotra, Sutra, and Shaka. So the Sutra names seem to be coinciding with the Smritis that you mentioned, Apastamba Sutra, Ashwalayana, Bodhayana Sutra, etc. The Sutra, I presume, is different than Smriti. It doesn't say I must subscribe to
yeah. Sutras are with the Kalpa. Sutras belong to Kalpa tradition, different ways of performing the Vedic ritual, yajnas and yagas and so on. So many of the sages wrote books on Kalpas also. So Kalpa Sutras belonging to Apastamba and others are there. But Apastamba is also well known for his Smriti.
So these Kalpa Sutras are timeless. They are not like Smriti bound to certain times.
They are not timeless because they are all related to the performance of rituals. And those rituals are not the fundamental essence of Vedanta. Rituals are subject to changes. This is one serious problem, Very often in our understanding of Vedanta or Indian philosophy, we put so much of rituals and Puranas into the front. With the result, philosophy takes a back seat. Every time a great teacher like Krishna, you find in the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna doesn't mince words when he criticizes extreme ritualists. Yakshe dasyami modishe itya jnana vimohidaha. Not very pleasant words or invectives he uses. Strong language, criticizing extreme ritualists. Now, Kalpa Sutras are related to rituals. So why should Kalpa Sutras be considered to be very important? It's an important thing to remember.
But you mentioned that Adi Shankara did not ridicule.
Adi Shankara did not ridicule anything. But he ridiculed the idea of the Mimamsakas who used to argue that every person has to perform these rituals. It's just like saying that a man of 60 years, a college professor, also should eat candies. Rituals are just eating candies. What are the prayers uttered when you perform the rituals? Pasyema Sharadasyatam, Jivema Sharadasyatam, Bruyasya Sharadasyadat. Let me live for 100 years. Let me be able to speak for 100 years. Let me be able to see for 100 years. All these prayers, fortunately many people don't know the meaning of the mantras with which they are uttering the rituals. Asking for more wealth. It's just like asking for candies. That's why it is important for you to listen to Vivekananda, who came in our own times. He is not against temples, but he wanted people to think beyond temples. He was not against rituals, but he wanted to remind people about thinking beyond temples. The same thing Shankaracharya did.
So if rituals are done with the right mindset, keeping the ultimate goal in mind, it's okay.
If you really perform any ritual with a pure heart, without selfish motive, then one day you will realize, I should go beyond this. The very fact that people do not go beyond rituals, the reason is they are performing rituals with great aspiration, great desire. If you perform rituals without any desire, then you will transcend rituals. You don't feel a need to perform rituals. That's the idea behind. You will go beyond the candies. That's the idea behind. Okay, any other question? Most welcome. You should always remember, none of our great Vedantists or sages ever criticized rituals. This is an important thing. They only criticized the idea that rituals alone constitute the essence of religion. That's an important thing to remember. None of the great philosophers, sages, all the way from Lord Krishna to our own time, Vivekananda, Sri Ramanuja, Ramana Maharshi, anyone you take, none of them ever criticized rituals as such. But they criticized the idea that religion begins with rituals, it ends with rituals. That they discarded. That's an important thing. Please continue. Please, David, please. You wanted to say something?
Swami, if I remember correctly, I think Swami Vivekananda's favorite Upanishad was the Katha Upanishad. I'm wondering why he chose that one to be his favorite.
Oh, yeah, I think Kathopanishad Swamiji chose that for one very important reason. He admired one important quality of Nachiketa, the main protagonist, the main character in the Kathopanishad. Is Shraddha. The Shraddha is a Sanskrit word which Swamiji says cannot be translated into English. Shraddha means, Shraddha you can say, if we can put together integrity, honesty, sincerity, truthfulness, all these qualities, your ability to identify with what you believe in, what you are doing with 100% sincerity. That Swamiji found in Nachiketa, the main character, the student, Kathopanishad. And also in the Kathopanishad, the teacher Yama also admired this. And Vivekananda wanted this Shraddha to be taken up as a great national ideal. When Swamiji addressed people in India during his lecture tour, you find Swamiji again and again repeats the importance, he emphasizes the importance of Shraddha. If you have got Shraddha, then you get everything. So in the Kathopanishad, there is about Shraddha Avivesha. Nachiketa was possessed by Shraddha. You can imagine the strength, the force of the expression. So if you are possessed by sincerity, That is a far more powerful expression than saying he is very sincere. Totally different. You are possessed by sincerity, you are possessed by Shraddha. Shraddha avivesha. Pedodaha, Jagdagruna, Dugdadoha, Nirindriyaha, like that. The Kathopanishad, there is a statement where Nachiketa, the little boy, found out the tricks played by his own father. His father was supposed to give whatever was precious, all his precious wealth. But instead of giving away useful things, his father was giving away cows which are absolutely useless, which can't give milk, which can't eat food, which may be a burden to anyone who gets them. So Nachiketa saw from a distance, he says, Saddha Vivesha. He became possessed. So it is not sincerity alone. There are many more things: integrity, honesty, urge for the right thing, all these qualities. So that Saddha is an important theme discussed in the Kathopanishad. So Swamiji himself wanted that this Saddha to be taken up as an ideal by Indians. That is the immediate context. But in the broader sense, you find even during his conversation with Sister Nivedita, Swamiji talks about the Saddha of Nachiketa. Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah.
Pranam Maharaj.
Yeah, namaskar.
What do Hindu scriptures say about proselytization and conversion?
Well, Hinduism is essentially a non-proselytizing religion, but it doesn't forbid you when you want to become a Hindu, but it doesn't go about proselytization. Now, you find different groups in Hindu tradition. They spread their ideas of God, but they don't formally ask you to give up their religion and come and become a Hindu. They don't do that. It is almost unknown in Hindu tradition. They never do that. They may ask you to take up one mantra or to perform or to go to a temple. But they won't ask you. They won't criticize other religion, because a Hindu generally, an ideal Hindu, can never think that any other religion can be wrong. If we go to India, for example, today you find less of them, but I know when I was very small, in fact, one of the Vedic rituals performing, which actually Atiratra was performed, which is witnessed by Fritz Stahl, who was a professor of Vedas in the Berkeley Central University. I was close to my own place. So you find there were many great Vedic scholars. You see, if you talk to them about other faith systems or religious ideas, it is their own way. But they will never criticize that any other path is wrong. That's an important thing, Ekam sat vipra bahudha vadanti. Bahudha vadanti means truth is one, but people approach those truths from different angles. So that Rigveda statement in the first mandala itself, it comes. That is the underlying principle of Hinduism. Hinduism is a totally non-proselytizing religion. Even if people from other traditions flock to different groups, different cults within Hinduism, Hindus never tell them that path is wrong, so you come over to thy side. They will never call other ideas of God as satanic or wrong or evil. No, such a person cannot be a Hindu, because that is diametrically opposite to the teachings of the Vedas. That's an important thing to remember.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you.
Ashwin, please go ahead and ask your question.
Namaste, Swamiji.
Namaste.
Thank you for the lecture. So I have this very broad question, which is a lot of these philosophies, be it Buddhistic, be it Jaina, and even within the Vedantic ones, Madhva, Ramanuja, Shankara, why is it that we have so many different philosophies? Like, is there something like an absolute thing, or is everything relative in some sense? Like, yeah, I'm just trying to understand why there are these many different ways to explain, let's say, an absolute truth.
You know, the one important reason is there was no hierarchy within Hinduism which forbade people from asking questions. This is an important thing to remember. So, the sheer diversity of different philosophical schools in Hinduism. I mean, you have to remember, India is a densely populated country with total freedom for thought. If you go to this temple, any of the temples in the Bay Area, they won't ask you, you should stand, you should only go to Shiva and don't care for Vishnu. You can go or you don't have to go. Important thing to remember. The total freedom. Why total freedom? Again, ekam sat vipra bahuda vadanti. Truth is one, but the truth can have different roads that will take you there. That fundamental thesis of Hinduism is behind this. It doesn't mean that every person is aware of this statement from Rigveda Samhita, but it became a cultural undertone. It became a cultural landscape for every person. That's an important thing. That was why it became a totally non-proselytizing religion. Secondly, they never thought of any other religion as being wrong. It's an important thing. As for the diversity of philosophical, so you should rather celebrate diversity. That's an important thing. See, have you seen, if you go to Ajanta and Ellora, if you go to the ancient Buddhist caves, temples, or if you go to Laos, Cambodia, China, Japan, Korea, all these countries, Tibet, you find pictures of different versions of Buddha. Some Buddha got a huge pot belly, you can imagine, smiling all the time. People don't ask the question, why do you have a Buddha who looks so pot belly and smiling? They don't bother. So you find this idea, even while worshipping a great man Buddha, like Buddha, they could think beyond the rigidity of one specific method, one rigid method, which alone should be accepted and everything else should be rejected. Second reason that for second answer, it's a very important answer, is Hindu religious tradition was not founded by a single individual. It is an evolved religion and not a revealed religion, in the normal sense in which Abrahamic religions are considered to be revealed religions. So all the truth was revealed to these sages in different places. They worship, they experience in so many different ways. So it was not founded by a single individual. To give an example, when the temple, the Jerusalem temple was destroyed by invaders in 51 AD, they came to India, and what the king did, you are coming from different place, all right, you want to worship, all right, take this temple. He gave some temples, some villages, and asked them, you perform your worship in this manner. Then in the 7th century AD, the followers of Zoroaster came, Persians, they were following the Zoroaster religion. They came to the west coast of India, so the northwest coast of India. And Hindu kings guided over them some places and temples and so on. So you can find this happening. Why they did that? Oh, they are coming from another, all right, go ahead. Because it was not dictated by a single individual founder and did not therefore follow a single individual church, single individual hierarchy. So that may be the explanation why there were so many philosophical schools. You can find even the teachers of materialism, Indian materialism, they were called Charvaka, they were called Charvaka Rishi. You used to call a Rishi. So how can a materialist be called a Rishi? Rishi Mantra Drashta. So you can find this happening. It was not founded by a single individual, and then it did not follow a single hierarchy. These are some of the reasons for this mind-boggling diversity of different schools emerging side by side. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Swami?
Yeah.
I have another follow-up to the... Is when you talk about the Shraddha in Nachiketa, is that this, like, I know Sri Ramakrishna said that faith is the most important thing.
Yeah.
I remember him saying, is that a different use of the word faith, or is it...
Exactly. In fact, Vivekananda used Shraddha in that sense, Swami Vivekananda, he used that term exactly in the sense in which Sri Ramakrishna used the word faith, Shraddha. Not faith in the normal dictionary meaning, but it goes far beyond. If a carpenter has Shraddha, he will make something really wonderful. He'll be happy about it. The thing will be happy, what he builds will be happy, and also that will give him an inner happiness. Because with Shraddha, whatever you do, that takes you to that takes you along the road to higher life. It is not perfectionism as we understand in modern times. It's not perfectionism. You can be very perfect. A carpenter may make a wonderful chair, but he may be all miserable within. But Shraddha will make you do something that's really wonderful, and also will give the person a kind of inner fulfillment and joy. That's an interesting thing. It will take you on in the road to your own spiritual evolution, right?
Does that include, like, faith in God, faith that God will help you?
Yeah, that's true, yeah. That's certainly, in fact, all great mystics in all traditions were men of this Shraddha, this faith. That total integrity, total identification with what they believe in, what they do. You can find this in men like great leaders, political leaders like Lincoln or Gandhi. You find this integrity, Shraddha. It helps you to convert what you believe in into a great idealism, a great ideal, something that you totally identify with. So thank you for wonderful questions which helped me to explain things which I may have overlooked in the normal course of the lecture.
Maharaj, there's one more question.
Yeah.
AJ, please go ahead and ask.
Yeah.
Last question.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Thank you for the lecture, Swami. So a question real quick. So at the outset of this lecture, what I thought I heard was when there are contradictions between the Shrutis, Smritis and Puranas, the order is Shruti greater than Smriti greater than Puranas. And that is admitted by the authors themselves.
Yeah.
I wonder why there is room for contradiction, and if they're aware of the contradiction, why they are not preventively not avoiding that.
Yeah, that again will take us to this question, the gradual evolution. A huge country, Indian subcontinent, you have to include India of those times, included today's Afghanistan, Burma, and also culturally, even Ceylon, today's Sri Lanka. So huge landmass which are highly densely populated place. So the highest Vedantic teachings did not reach the masses. Even today you find India, people belong to different levels of understanding and convictions. So naturally, in different settlements, different societies, different practices prevailed, different interpretations prevailed, based on their own tribalistic practices or understanding. So there was a lot of diversity. That's why innumerable smrtis emerged. You have to remember, smrtis are nothing but attempts to practice the highest teachings at different levels. Smrtis do contain some great teachings, no doubt about it. For example, Grihasthasu yada pasye vali palidam atmanaha apatyasya apatyam tadaranyam samasaya. You find a Manusmriti. Now, Manusmriti, for example, says every householder, when he gets old, when his face gets wrinkled, when his hair gets grey, he should retire to a forest hermitage and spend the rest of his lifetime in contemplation. An aged person should do that. Etra naristha pujante tatra deva ramandicha etra yadastu na pujante tatra sarva phalakriyaha. So Manusmriti. So wherever women are honored and respected, there even gods are happy and pleased. Wherever women are not honored and respected, all actions go in vain. This is also Smriti. And also there are statements in the Smriti literature which actually restricts the freedom of the women folk. So where do you draw the line? There were different interpretations, different practices in so many different levels of society. So one of the great Smriti, these Smritikaras must have compiled them all together in one work. There were altogether so many. Parasara, Pastamba, Ashwalayana, then Vyasa, Jabala, so many Smritis are there. Yajnavalkya Smriti is very, very prominent, which actually which is very broad, very scientific, which actually speaks against capital punishment. There are statements in Yajnavalkya Smriti which actually forbids capital punishment. So the point is, there were diverse ideas. Some of them are very, very scientific, very modern, very rational. Some of them appear to be a bit divisive and unjust. So these must have developed in different communities, different tribes, Vedic tribes, This must be the only explanation. Yeah. Thank you for the question. You can continue this discussion in the coming session. You are most welcome. Of course, I have an announcement. There will be no class next Sunday because I will be traveling alone. I will be traveling again. There will be no class on this the foundational text of Indian philosophy. Next Sunday, that is May 22nd. So please remember, there will be no class next Sunday. So the next class will be on 29th May. So please remember, there will be no class on this text, on this book, on this theme, the foundational text of Indian philosophy. There will be no class next Sunday, May 22nd. But the following Sunday there will be class. That means the next class on this subject will be on May 29th, 6 p.m. Please continue to monitor our website savedanta.org for the latest information. You are most welcome. I will be out of town next week. Thank you. Namaskar, all of you.
Namaskar, Swami.
Namaskar. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. Yeah. Thank you.
Recording stopped.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you.